Welcome to our podcast, where we resurrect the spirit of Nigeria's historic society of creatives. The Mbari Club was founded in 1961 at the University College Ibadan and nurtured geniuses like Achebe, Soyinka, and Fela. In each episode, we explore the craft of today's artists, preserving the stories of the storytellers that are shaping our generation.
You guys are always giving me all these very, very polite political answers. How are you doing? Good.
Today's guest is a writer, poet, performer, curator, and storyteller. Her work as a performer of spoken word is well documented across 3 albums titled Dirty Laundry, In Memory of Forgetting, and Transcendence. We've listened to these masterpieces, now let's meet the mastermind. Please welcome Wana Udobang. Good afternoon, Wana.
Afternoon, hi.
How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. You've given me some wine, so
Lovely.
I'm feeling excited.
All right. So you do a lot of things. I know some of what you do. I don't know all of what you do. Every time we talk, I find out more about what you do. So we'll try and go into a lot of that today. But the conversation starter, how do you like to be introduced?
So my name is Wana Udobang. I always say, so at these days, I just usually say I'm an artist and a storyteller. I'm a storyteller, right? So I say I'm a storyteller and my work exists in different forms. So it exists in writing, poetry, performance, curation, sometimes in filmmaking as well. I've made films, I've worked in filmmaking before. So so essentially all of it is storytelling, but exists in different forms.
All right. So primarily you're a storyteller.
Yes.
And depending on the story, it takes whatever form.
Exactly. There you go.
Fair enough. I think that's something I can relate to a lot. I like to see myself as a storyteller as well. Initially, I used to be like I'm a writer. But when I started having to engage in capitalism to feed and survive, right?
As we all do.
There was less time to write. So it now became, okay, what other ways can I explore storytelling that doesn't require me to spend 18 months to 2 years just working on one particular like body of work.
Yeah.
So I started doing like podcasts and all of this type of stuff. But I'm also one of those type of guys who it didn't dawn on me that I was a storyteller till much later. And I think in like growing up, people looked at creatives and storytellers as people that it's something you lean on when you don't know book. So for example, it's like, you didn't make it to science class. Oh yeah,
I was going to say that.
You didn't
exactly.
you didn't do well in uni. Or you're an artist now. You're dyeing your hair. So for a lot of people, it's like there's a perception that it's a fallback thing. However, for someone like you, right, you studied at the University of Creative Arts.
Yes.
So it gives a sort of sense that from scratch, you know what you're about.
Yes.
Like for you, it was always plan A.
Yes.
So what I want to know is how did you come up and like what nurtured all of that to that point of clarity where you knew this is what you wanted to do? What was the formative part?
So I always say like I feel like the formative part of being able to of deciding my career path, it was actually quite traumatic. Yes. So I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 13.
So you were your plan A.
No, but it wasn't one of those, they want you to be a lawyer thing. I mean, you're in Nigeria, you're a child, doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant. There's one more and then family disgrace or something like that, you know. But I genuinely wanted to be a lawyer. And I wanted to be a lawyer because at the time, my parents were going through a divorce. Right. And I was also seeing beyond my own parents' kind of drama that was happening. I also remembered seeing a lot of like my mom's friends going through really horrific things where their husbands kicked them out of the house. And and then you would have some women who couldn't see their children, who weren't allowed to see their children. So they would come and maybe somebody would hide their mother would come, hide in your house or hide in a kiosk. You will now go and go to their house, tell their daddy that, you just want to play. You want to go somewhere sharp. To get their children out to then see their mother. So I was seeing a lot of those kind of things. I remember one of my neighbors, as soon as their father died, relatives had already come to start clearing out their things. They had no more money. They had to move away. So I think from the age of I would say like 8, 9, I'd already started seeing all these things around. I just felt a very deep sense of like unfairness and injustice. So as a 10-year-old girl, I already felt like this world was just unfair and unkind to women at the time because of the things I'd been seeing about like women's lives around me.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lagos, in Ikeja, you know, and then as I said, my own parents' drama, my father was very violent towards my mother as well. So it's like, this cannot be. Is this how, this is your life supposed to be as a babe? Yeah. Like, it's just going to end in bad things. And so literally, I remember, I think at like 12, I was like, I'm going to be a divorce lawyer. That's actually what I said to my friends. So they're just going to be like a mad person. Like, I don't understand. Do you even know what that means?
That's very specific.
I was very, very specific at the time. And then when I did, when we wrote our junior WAEC, I actually got in science class. I had to go and meet the guidance counselor in school. I said, I want to go into art class. They abused, They said, why would you want to do that? Exactly, art is for all the olodos. Why will you go to art class? Do you know what a privilege it is that they put you in science class? You want to go to, I said, sir, that's where I want to be. Like, because if I cannot do the courses, the subjects that will allow me to do law, then there is no need. So that was pretty much it. And then what then happened was I went to court twice during my parents' wahala. Yes. Yeah. So I went to court twice, and there were things that I experienced, and my parents' case ran for a very, very long time. So I just felt jaded, and I was like, this your power to the people. Can't work. It can't.
This is not the medium for exercising justice. Yeah.
So that was literally what it was like. All this I want to fight your teenage, small teenager, you want to fight your rights. I was like, it's not going to work. So, you know, when you had, as I said, I'd been to court twice, and I was like, yeah, the things that I just experienced there as a teenager, I was like, nah, this thing cannot, being a lawyer can't work. Yeah. And so immediately after that, I said, oh, you know what, maybe I think I'll be a journalist because then I can write about all the unfair things in the world. Enough. Yes. So that was pretty much it. And so by 16, I remember trying to writing JAM and filling my JAM form. And, you know, I was going to apply because in Nigeria, we didn't have journalism. We have mass comm. Yeah. So I remember my brother, my brother trying to fill the form. And he was like, oh, what are you putting? I was like, oh, I want to do mass comm. He said, what's that? So you better just write that law there. So funny enough, I still wrote the law as my university first choice. But luckily I ended up leaving Nigeria. So as soon as I got to the UK, I knew that I wanted to study journalism. And that was what I pretty much pursued.
Okay. Yeah. So was there also any like flow from like fiction or poetry, which is like your primary medium? Yeah. Like was there any early
So I think by the age of 15, I used to scribble stuff down. It was again part of this depression of family drama and my own sense of an outlet. So I used to write things down, but I used to write them on paper. And at the time, what it was that I was trying to disguise what was like journaling. Yeah. So that people if anybody saw it, they wouldn't really know what I was writing. So it was almost like I was code writing. And that was what I was doing. So it was my own sort of, I used to call it my outlet for catharsis. So just trying to make sense of all these things that are happening in my home and how our lives had changed drastically and all this terrible stuff. And so I was always writing these things. And I think it was maybe when I was 17 or so, my best friend saw one of the sheets of paper. And she was like, babes, this is poetical. I was like,
Bars.
Listen, quite literally, I was like, She was like, no, mad, he's mad, he's mad. This is very poetic. I was like, because we studied poetry and literature in secondary school, but I was actually terrible at it. I hated poetry in secondary school. I found it very like indecipherable. Everything was always so dense. And I was just like, I beg, this thing, they give me a headache. Do you know what I mean? And I think particularly because of a lot of the poems that we were studying, I don't know, different people's schools are different, but you were studying a lot of dead white men. So sometimes you're just like, I don't really understand what this guy is saying. You know, we're trying to analyze all these things. I'm just like, I beg. Hey, it doesn't mean anything to me, you know, that kind of thing. So I can't even say that, I was so in love with poetry as a child. No. But I was just like instinctively kind of like trying to express my feelings and trying to code these things as well, making the sentences shorter. Again, as I said, coding a lot of this, what was a journal at the time. And so, but I think the moment my friend said, her name is NK, and she said, man, this is poetic. I think immediately she said that. That was it. So she planted something in me, and I literally started studying poetry immediately after that. Like, I was like, okay, there's something here, clearly. I started studying. So my friends in our house were like my first audience. So I actually read my poems to them.
So you started performing?
Yes, I quite literally was performing to them. So I used to read my poems to them, that sort of stuff. So by the time I actually got to university, it felt like I'd been writing poetry for a while to me. In fact, after she said that, she bought me my first journal because I'd been writing on paper, different sheets of paper. So she bought me my first journal. And so in that moment, I think that's when sort of poetry was born for me. And I genuinely started to start. I actually started reading a lot. Even those dead white men, I started reading them a lot. Yeah. I started reading Auden,
with
Keats, Yeats. But a new appreciation. But sometimes I was still like, guy, I'm still not. But then, of course, I started to discover Black writers and more artists. And then, of course, after that, I discovered spoken word. So it was like this process of like discovering of different types and layers of poetry to find myself in them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of interesting things. I'll try to touch on them one-on-one because a lot of things really interested me. The first thing you touched on that interested me was how you mine personal stories of your own like experiences and those of the women around you. And for me, right, that is something that is very, very critical because people say, oh, write what you know. But I don't think it's just as simple as that, right? For me, I think there's an entire process as an artist where you like have to figure out how to tell stories, how to honor the stories you're telling, how to be ethical around it, and just how to make sure you capture everything right. And it's an entire journey getting to that point where like you found your formula, right? And on the other side, like there's this flip side. There's this story, this Japanese short story, which is one of my favorite short stories in the world, right? It's called Hell Screen by some Japanese writer about 100 years ago. And it speaks to this. So let me just segue a bit, right? Okay. So this story tells about some guy called Yoshihide. He's the greatest painter in all of the empire, like at the time, right? And he wants to paint for the emperor. So eventually he finds favor with the emperor. He's doing like little stuff and everything. And he even gets to a position where his only daughter finds favor with the king. So she starts living with the princess and everything. So he's doing okay. And then there's this like great commission of the ages, right? Where the emperor wants someone to paint hell, right? So you hang it as a centerpiece in his palace. Now, the problem with Yoshihide was this guy only painted things he knew and painted things he could see. So it was the type of thing where he had to mine the stories around him to create, which is the dilemma every artist comes across, right? And with him, he wants to paint hell. So one day he's walking by the road and he sees someone dying from an accident. And instead of helping, he starts like scribbling, right, to capture it. And one time his helper like falls in the studio and like needs first aid, and he's like out there scribbling it. So he's doing all of this, and meanwhile his daughter is also in the palace, and his daughter gets to a point where she catches the eye of the king. So he propositions her, but she refuses. So the king, wanted to punish him, now tells Yoshihide, as the final like centerpiece of this painting, I want someone burning in hell, right? And what he proposed was, knowing Yoshida's format, was he would light his daughter on fire. And Yoshida was like, no, wala, bet. Because for him, like, that's how committed he was to his craft.
Oh, gosh.
So for me, right, like, as a writer, it's always a thing where, okay, you're mining stories around you. Yeah. But at what cost? Yes. And are you honoring it right? And are you representing it right? You always have to find balance. And especially because of the themes of a lot of what you do, right, which is about women and the things they've been through and how they heal from it. I think you're also wearing a lot of, like, you're carrying a lot of burden on your shoulders to represent the stories. And I think you do it excellently well. Thank you. Right? The question is the how. Like, how do you get to that point where you can tell people's stories honorably? Yeah. You can tell it ethically, and you're not necessarily trivializing their pain for claps, but you're doing it in a way that honors their healing journey, honors their salvation, and all of that. So I know that was very low. Like,
no. Really, I mean, I love the context that you placed as well, because it's very real, where people get to a point where they stop seeing the humanity of people and start seeing human beings as stories, and what I like to see as human beings as content as well. So I think that, for me, I think part of my process of telling stories, and I would even go particularly with poetry, because I always say that my poetry is for me. You know, there are people that say, oh, no, you're writing for other people. I'm nah. My poems are from me, primarily, and then I'm inviting you into them, into my world, right? So I think I'm very specific sometimes where some of the stories I'm telling, I say, look, it's my version of events. So I'm telling you my what I'm experiencing
from my own eyes,
from my own angle, right? And I try, and I feel like I try to not just express, but to convey that this story has many portions. I'm only giving you one perspective.
Side of it, yeah.
And I think that I try to convey that this is not a totality of something, and that's why it's always been very important to me that even if you listen to my poems, there's no neat bow. It's never a conclusive neat bow. It's always an interrogation, because even for me, storytelling is about trying to make sense of things. I think I've always seen when I'm telling a story, it's me processing. It's a space of processing. It's a space of making sense, of sense making and meaning making as well.
So you're not necessarily giving a verdict.
No.
You're giving your interrogation.
Yes, I can never give a verdict because giving a verdict is so dangerous, especially because even as a human being, you're constantly growing, so your opinions are changing. So that's why if you listen to my 3 albums, I always say I've been writing about the same thing for the past 15 years or 20 years.
But your thoughts are just evolving.
You are listening to an evolution of the same story or the same or different thoughts. That's how I approach storytelling. So it's not a place, and I think sometimes one of the issues is that certain writers or certain storytellers place themselves in this sort of demagogue status. And it doesn't help that the world also mythologizes artists, right, as well. So you already feel like, oh, maybe probably because, artistry is seen as this noble thing where people are also poor. So they're also like heightened and said, they are the voice.
The noble voice.
The noble voice of the generation.
We're also in the era of thought leadership,
exactly.
right? Where everyone on social media is incentivized to be a thought leader.
People now send you messages you've not said anything on this issue. You've not said anything. I said, I have nothing to say. Yeah. So I think there's that. And people fall into that trap of feeling like they are some expert voice or their opinions are so valid and so important that their work really says something. I think for me, my work is only part of the big conversation, and it's an interrogation in this conversation. It's not a conclusion. It's not a higher authority. It's part of a tapestry of interrogating many situations and trying to make sense of it. And as I grow, I continue to explore and sometimes dig into as well. So I think that's my position, and I feel like I hope that my work conveys that position as well. I think even in terms of ethics, because sometimes there are people in your work, right? Because your lives all intersect. The stories don't only belong to you. And I think for me, I'm always like, okay, how do I represent them or my thoughts on whatever it is that they are or their experience without having to put words in their mouth?
Fair enough.
Which is very delicate, but I think it's also something I'm always with an observatory eye.
Yeah. It's a fair blend of humility and curiosity, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's very lovely. I think you also spoke about, so the first layer was obviously the people around you and the stories you wanted to tell. The second layer was honing the technical parts of it, right? And the type of people you read. Now, you spoke about people you read, but I know there is that informal aspect of it. There's also the very formal aspect of it, which is like going to school and also doing the International Writers Program in Iowa. So what would you say was the experience in both directions, right? And I say this because a lot of people obviously start with learning from the people they read from, right? And not everybody has access to the other formal channel of learning. So what would you say were your experiences with both?
So I didn't end up going to Iowa, by the way, just COVID issues and many things like that, yes. But I did get the fellowship, but I didn't end up going. But that aside, so I think I've always been an informal learner in general. I think I like learning stuff. Yeah. I have said this before in my performances that I realized that learning is also a part of survival for me. Like, I think I grew up having to learn how to do things to survive. Yeah. But I enjoy learning. Like, it's something that I love doing. So I think one of the things in terms of, I think, I would say in poetry for me was, okay, the moment that I realized, okay, what I was writing was poetic in some way, shape or form, right? I started to read more experience. And you will go through this phase of trying to write like certain people or what they tell
imitation,
you. Yes, imitation, what they tell you they think is poetry. And I think, I remember even my first album, you would hear me sounding more American. Like my cadence is very American.
I'll listen to that this morning. I was like,
yeah, my cadence, because this is what year was it? 2013 or something. My cadence is still very American because we're coming from watching Def Poetry Jam.
Yes.
So, and then as you start to grow, you start to become more comfortable or find yourself or find your own rhythm, and even started. You would then notice that I have more Nigerian terminology in my poems later on. Then there's a part, I get to my third album, my language is in my poems. Right? So you read more and you're like, oh, so you're allowed to do this. Oh, so you're allowed to do that. There are many things. And I think that's what reading really does. It gives you permission. It really just does give you permission. The more widely you read, the more you experience performances or whatever it is. You're like, oh, okay, this is so interesting. I can do this, so I can do that. So my poem can be a song. I can make it into music, right? Yeah. So I think I've always been an informal learner, but I think what I had to get comfortable with was my own style of learning, which is that I remember for a very long time, because I wasn't this formally trained poet with like sonnets and haikus and all these words. You do understand? I used to feel I would feel a little intimidated by it. So I would say I double in poetry. Do you know what I mean? And then I realized like, I'm not any less of a poet than anybody else that uses whatever kind of language but I had to find my own ways of like, okay, what are my prompts? How do I play with form for me? Yeah. And I think it was getting comfortable in my own ways of learning. It could be informal, it could be, whatever it is. Even till now, there's sometimes I see like poetry workshops and I'm like, I can't because I'll be confused. If I enter that workshop, I'll be confused. Yeah. When they start telling you, I want you to write a blah, 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 they call it one name. I'm just something drum. I'm like, what does this mean, for God's sake? You now read what it means on Google. It now means how to, you add, just like, this is scratching my head. Meanwhile, if you told me in a different way that maybe it is just, making a city into a meal. Yeah. That makes more sense to me. Like how am I going to write about a recipe for love or something? I don't know, something random, like take a city and make it a person. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
And it's also different if maybe on your own you had read something like that and said, okay, how do I imitate this? And next thing you found the formula for it.
Exactly. So I'm also very good at that, where I can read things and decipher a structure. And I can decipher the structure and I know what that structure means for me. But when you start using all these academic terms, I don't even understand what half of those things mean sometimes. So I think that's been it. So I've been in lots of like writerly workshops and I've been to different fellowships, but mostly my fellowships have mostly been journalism related, I would say. And you get to be in all this, but I think what you learn is to be comfortable in your own process, really.
Fair enough. And one thing I've also enjoyed, right, is the mediums you've explored, right? So growing up, we knew poetry as writing just like line by line,
A, B, C, D, C, D, rhyming.
There was also a phase where like you write on the left side of the page, on the right side of the page. And for us, like that was the depth of poetry, right? But like you said, sometime in maybe the last about 10 years ago, I discovered like spoken word and I took a liking to it. But at the same time, it also seemed like a very American and a very Black American. It almost seemed something like that was part of their culture. However, over the past few years, we've seen people like Titilope Shonuga do interesting things with poetry. So recording it in a way where it's like music, it's like affirmations, and also creating entire performances around it, right? Elaborate performances around it, which is pushing the bounds of what we know as poetry, right? So I'd want to know what's the inspiration of that, but I also want to know what you're trying to achieve. What's the artistic purpose, and do you think you've met it thus far?
Okay. So I think even discovering spoken word, also the person really was Basi Ikpi for many of us. Like it was like, as I said, Deaf Poetry Jam, watching it on YouTube. I was second or third year at uni, and I was like, oh wow. And it felt very relatable, right? It felt very relatable. And I was like, okay, this is really interesting, you know, that sort of stuff. Of course, you start to study it more. And I think what it did was a sense of accessibility. So it even gave me comfort that felt like I wasn't really a poet. It's like, oh, okay, so there are other ways to do this thing that's really interesting as well. Of course, there's always this debate and dichotomy between page and stage or whatever. I generally don't get into all of that. But I think it was just very interesting that this thing that has been, I would say, like a healing tool for me is actually quite accessible. So because the impression of poetry is like, it's so dense, it's very deep people that can engage in it.
And I was say, it's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody, you know? But I was like, if somebody like me, who is not really any of those kinds of people, like falls in love with this thing, I think it was like, I wanted to spread the gospel. Like, look, there's this thing that is really cool that we do with words. And trust me, you will feel something, or it will do something for you. You'll be entertained or excited or feel stuff. Like, it's so interesting. And I think that's how I felt about it. But I think the deeper I went into it. So why I actually did a poetry album the first time was because I wanted to do a book, right? As everybody normally does. Yeah. But then apparently no publisher, they said publishers don't publish poetry because poetry doesn't sell, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. So apparently at the time, I think the only option would have been to self-publish. Yeah. Now a friend of mine had self-published, and then I asked her.
It's tough. Especially for poets.
Yeah, so exactly. So I asked her experience. Yeah. And she was like, it's great, you know, but the selling of the book, you know, all I kept hearing was, you have thousands of books under your bed. And, you know, and I was just like, and I was working on radio at the time. And I was like, how will I start forcing people to be buying book now? All this kind of wahala. So I just said, you know what? And I'd listened to a few American like spoken word albums, Ursula Rucker and a few more other people, Girls Called Heron. I was like, you know what? Maybe I should make an album. And I love music. I was always around music and musicians. A lot of my friends were musicians. They had studios. So I was always doing stuff with them anyway. So I was like, let's experiment and let me just do an album. And then I did that, the first album, which was called Dirty Laundry. And I was like, you know what? What comes to the worst? Even if people don't even like poetry, they're not interested, they will see my face on it and say, it's that girl, when I went on radio, let me just buy to support her. Yeah. You know, and they will listen to it in their car. Yeah. Because, again, there was also the conversation around how people don't like reading at that time as well. There was a whole thing about people not liking to read. So it's like, you know what? Even if they would just be like, I'll just buy it to support. And I will put it in my car and listen, you know, what's come to the worst. After I finish, I will just drop inside the dustbin, you know, whatever it is. And quite literally, I was selling it like from place to place. Go to Bogobrio, I'll sell it. I was selling it like literally in my handbag. You know, I'll go to Freedom Park, sell it. People were buying it. So people were actually listening and they were like, I actually really like it. So it's really nice. So it's really blah, blah, blah. So I think that first album was just like an encouragement, you know. And I was like, okay, I think there might be something here. And I was like, I enjoyed it. Like I enjoyed I just enjoyed like the whole genre meshing of music and words and all of this sort of stuff. And I was like, I want to do this again. And again, as I said, it was like, by the time I got to the second album, you start realizing that there's just so much more that we can explore in terms of how to use words and how to make words into music, how to make words movable, right? How you see a verse as, you know, a stanza as a verse and one part as a bridge in a song, how it can be theater, how poetry can be theater, how poetry can be production, how poetry can be dance. And I think I just started to see the vast ways in which words could bend into anything. And I really like the idea of inviting many people. I don't particularly like this cool kids club thing. Yeah. I don't care for it, that, it's only us that are blah, blah, blah. I love the fact that, you know, I can bring in somebody who naturally would not care to listen to this type of thing. I was like, this is really interesting. Oh, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. And like, I feel touched by this. And I think that's another thing, like, accessibility with language for me is very important because, as I said, words healed me or continue to be a part of my own healing process in life. And I'm like, I want to be able to share that with other people. And I really did feel and do feel that words can do that, but you have to be willing to connect with them.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point you made around access, right, and around distribution, because you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I want to self-publish," and I keep trying to explain that self-publishing is cool and you will publish. However,
it's hard.
publishing is just a little tiny part, right? There's
Absolutely.
marketing and distribution of the book, and if you don't have access to the entire like publishing infrastructure, that's something.
It's just a waste. It feels like a waste of time if you don't have.
It's a lot of effort, it's a lot of money, and it's very easy to get discouraged. However, what you and Talkway have proven is there are other ways, the alternative route to the market, right?
Yeah.
So people can play with all sorts of mediums of storytelling. It could be spoken word and like recorded into all sorts of formats as you have done it, but it could also be something altogether new that hasn't even been done before, right? And the ultimate aim is finding like that your small niche of like listeners or your small audience, whatever it may be, who would be able to access it in that initial format that it is, right? You spoke about, I mean, from early on, like performing for your friends and your family, like as a very, very young person. That's you at the earlier stage, finding your audience as well. Yeah, so that's super lovely stuff. I was also, you spoke about Dirty Laundry, and I was also at the Dirty Laundry exhibition.
Yeah,
you were right? There. Which is yet again you reinventing yourself in another format.
Yes.
And from there, that was your own exhibition. I know you also curated Jessica Suarez exhibition as well at Really. So that's you dabbling into yet another field. So what informed that move?
So I remember my first actual exhibition that I curated was called Strip, and it was for Really, and it was, I think, was it 20?
What the artists featured?
It had Isaac Emokpai, Logo, Farida Kekere, there were a bunch of other people. So it was so it was about exploring the body and nudity in arts. That was that exhibition. So I think that was my first time like curating art at an art exhibition. I've always loved arts, and my love for art didn't even come from me as a child. It came from when I went to art school. So as I said, I went to the University for the Creative Arts. So the hallway was called the what's it called? Something gallery, the Hockney Gallery. In my school, you get into the courtyard and it's like there's photography everywhere. There's always installation. There's all this stuff. So I'm in this school that is like full art.
So rich. Yeah.
Listen, and I remember even with my friends, because I remember my flat was my first year at school. One of my flatmates was studying animation, so he would be baking his clay. Or it's clay characters in our oven.
Oh,
yes.
Nice.
Then we had two filmmakers in the house. Then there was a girl studying glass blowing. I still remember she actually did a glass mold and gave it to me. I still have it till today. There was somebody studying metal work and jewelry.
These are things that we tell your daddy.
Do you understand? Like, you're just like, see, but imagine
just you don't know book.
But imagine, exactly. But imagine just being around that. Somebody came to school for 3 years, studying metal work and jewelry. The other flat, they are studying textile design. So they actually make fabric. So they're not just sewing, they're not sewing clothes, they're making fabric. So this is what I'm around. I remember one of my friends, she was in there was a girl that was in interior, it was interior design, but technically it was interior architecture. So these are they would carry molds to class, whatever to class. And so you're just in this high intense creative environment. So I think for me, that also just showed me what was possible. So just being interested in that and being around that for 3 years straight, I fell in love with art in so many different formats and so many different ways, because especially as students, you are constantly experimenting as well. I think that I always knew that somehow I never was afraid of trying things out with art because of that. So I think I remember when Majimele said, "Oh, do you want to curate?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, let's do this." And that was my first time. And then with Jessica's exhibition was the second time. She asked if I was interested, and I was like, of course. So for me, even with Dirty Laundry, it's an idea I had over 10 years ago, right? I was performing at Bugobiri at the time.
Yeah.
My brother was in the audience, and then after I finished this performance, I got emotional and teary-eyed. So on our way home, my brother and I were sharing this small flat at the time. So on our way back home, he says to me, he's like, "Man, our childhood was wild, dude." And I say, "Boy, it's really like to put our Dirty Laundry for public share." And then I was just like, interesting. And I slept off. When I woke up in the morning, I said, "Hey, Kong, I have this mad idea." He said, "What's that?" I said, man, you know when you said dirty laundry yesterday, that thing just got me thinking. I was like, imagine like this poem, all these poems there. I'll now print it on like, I said I'll paint it. I was like painted on like clothes and then hanging from laundry lines.
As dirty laundry.
As dirty laundry. He was like, I was like, it's mad, Abby. He's like, mad. This is how my voice. It's like, mad. Then I kept the idea. I called one of my friends, Ibi Anaba, who is a painter. Yeah. He was like, oh, he thinks it's a great idea, but at the time, all of us were all just hustling with our art. So Ibi also, because I thought I wasn't an artist, so I was like, I can't paint it. So I was like, maybe I'll collaborate with an artist who would do the painting of the poems on the fabric or something. So I kept this idea for literally like over 10 years. And then it was in 2019, I was like, you know what? I think I want to do this. Like, he just kept... In fact, eBay used to message me every year. He'll be like, how far dirty laundry?
When are we going to do this?
How far dirty laundry? I was like, it will happen. Don't worry, it will happen. And then eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And that was how... So yeah, it took like 10 years for me to, But again, for me, it speaks to how I've seen poetry. I'm like, I want different kinds of people to experience it. And I'm always like, where can I put poetry on? I want to put it on the pavement. I want to emblazon it on a building. Do you understand? I want you to go somewhere and see my poems like hanging on, dripping a building. I want you to, to go to a big park and it is a 4-screen channel installation of poems, or words projecting on a wall. I want you to see my poem on a billboard. Like, that's how I see poetry.
I want to clap, right? But because I really buy into that entire vision, right? I think it's something where, I mean, like, as a writer of longer form stuff, it's a vision I have, but it's a bit harder to work with, right? Because how do you do 50,000 words?
I know, right?
All sorts of formats,
but that's why you could take extracts, baby.
Fair enough. That's
Listen,
a very
you can
fair
take
point.
you can take extracts. You can cut. You can make a short film out of a short story. In fact, my first short film was a short story I wrote that was on brittle paper. I took the first 2 paragraphs and made it into a short film. And all I did was I used those first 2 paragraphs and made them internal monologue. And then the character was just moving around the room.
What's the name of that?
It's called Shrink.
Oh yeah, no, we're gonna do our homework.
We're gonna do our
homework. And something also interesting you really spoke about was like when you were at uni and all the people you had around you doing all sorts of interesting things, and even now with Dirty Laundry, having your friends and your brother around, and it's something I always like emphasize, right? The importance of like that community for ideas and crafts to gestate. And I think something I envy the most about people in school is that, like, in a hostel full of people, right? Like people who, if there are 100 people in your hostel, at least 20 people are doing interesting things.
Yes.
Right. And it's not like adulthood and like corporate life where like people are just showing up because
we need a salary.
Right? I think it's the other way in school because people don't want to show up. So they start doing interesting things so they don't have to show up in real life. And like, I just really, really appreciate that energy. And sometimes like, should I just go and get a degree so I'll be able to like write something interesting again? Like,
I don't know though. I don't know if that, because your adulthood has hits. So I think even just the age and the fact that you've tasted real life, it switches everything. It's not the same. So you're just like, if I go and get this degree, I'm just thinking, how this degree go increase money?
Fair enough. Which brings a very, very like interesting point up now, right? So, I mean, after uni, you did a lot of stuff in journalism. You did stuff on radio. You've done freelance stuff, and now like you're a very visible poet. I think you've gone from the point where people will see you and be like, "Oh, she's a journalist." People see you and saying, "Oh, she's a poet."
Thank God.
So I think you've made that.
I'm glad that people can see that.
However,
yes.
So that was like. Public facing, right?
Yes.
But behind the scenes, like how do you actually manage capitalism and creativity? And I think it's particularly different for you because for a lot of people, they do, for me, for example, I do finance, right?
Yes.
And then I do creativity for creativity's sake. For you, when you were in corporate life, it was still creativity.
Yeah.
So there's the chance of burning out because you're already telling stories so much here. How do you now tell your own original stories? How do you balance the capitalism end and the pure creativity for creativity's sake end?
So I remember I used to do a lot of compartmentalizing for a very long time, right? So where it was like my poetry, I used to say my poetry was for me, it's my thing. Nobody should touch it. Nobody should disturb me, whilst my journalism is as much as journalism is an art, writing is an art form, right? Or radio is an art form, but I'm telling other people's stories as opposed to mine most of the time with those ones. So again, it's clients' work. So I used to kind of have this big separation for many years where everything was always in compartments. But I think I also kind of got to a point where I didn't want to, because I found that the constant compartmentalizing always makes you feel like you're failing at something and you're winning at something, or you're doing better at something. And it feels like something's always in competition. Yes. Like, so eventually I had to just change my own mindset that, you know what? I create for a living, whether it's my story, whether it's other people's stories, whether it's client stories, because even now with poetry, I write for products and services and companies, you know. And I always tell people, like, I remember, because also even that compartmentalizing, it made me feel like when I would do certain clients' work, I would just be kind of moody about it, like, what is this? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm writing about a phone.
It doesn't spark joy.
It doesn't spark joy. But I'm writing... But I think when I sort of switched my mindset, I was like, I create for a living, full stop. It just switched up everything for me. And in that moment, if I'm writing about a phone, you will always find me inside that phone commercial. You know, you would find me in that service commercial or that service poem that I'm writing. And so I started seeing it as a more interesting challenge. Like, how do I take these seemingly inanimate objects or ideas that have probably nothing to do with who I am, and how do I kind of breathe life into it, and how do I insert myself or my own sort of or emotional resonance based on parts of my story inside of it. And I started enjoying that challenge even more. So it's funny because I could write a poem about, like, I remember I did a commission work for I think it was a Gates event, and it was an exhibition, and it was about, I was writing about science, right, and it was emotional when I was reciting the poem. Somebody else was like, this is about science, bro. What's going on? Yeah. You know, because I'm inside it. You know, I've even there's someone at MultiChoice, and I've done a few works for them, and every time I actually start crying, and it's like they told me to write about something else, but why is it? Because for me, it's like, the question is always, how do I put myself into it rather than separate myself, so that I can really kind of enjoy it, and I see it all as one thing. Right. Yeah. Yes, I do get the chance to, when I'm making an album, I get to do purely me, right? There's no client approval, no restrictions, no anything. And I also know nothing about the audience, so I don't really care. I'm just doing my thing, you know. So there's that. You have that. But I think with everything else, I just like, how can I be inside this work and enjoy it?
That's very interesting. That's a very interesting takeaway for me, because on my own end, I'm looking to make a very clear division, right? And this separates, how do they say it? Separate church from
and state, yes.
Yeah, like I'm trying to make a very clear division. And for me, it's always hard, because it's like, how do you put body and soul into this? Yeah. And then flip a switch and like put body and soul into this. So I think there's something I'll try and see what it would look like.
I think that, yes, as much as, you know, finances feel so separate from artistic endeavors, I do think that even just the mental attitude that I'm exploring a different side of myself. So even as a financial person, how am I able to creatively do certain things? Yeah, I think those things make it interesting. So even beyond my typically creative work, I also do a lot of consulting work as well. And some of these things are very, very structural jobs. But again, because of me being an artist, I'm always seeing the creative ways of doing that work that make it more interesting or bring a different dynamic to it, that, you know, the people I work for are like, wow, this is so amazing. We didn't think about it this way, or something. Because I'm also always thinking of, because when I'm writing, I'm like, what goes with what, or what works? And there's always this puzzle that is happening, right? Yeah. And I think in every world, it's useful.
Yeah. And I mean, even on the flip side, like if you see, for example, American culture, right, you see a lot of like bodies of work that pretty much try to capture what you have, like in the finance world. You have everything from Wolf of Wall Street and Big Short to things like American Psycho.
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
Where it's not, they're not necessarily on film. Like we excel shit on film, but like they're capturing the voice and the mindset and the spirit of.
And you have an insight into a world that people don't have. Exactly, I think that's for me, that these are the joys
I'll put you in acknowledgement.
See, I mean, why can't you write a story about a finance bro, something going through something like, but you have specific insights into these things that give a kind of reality that no other writer would know because they haven't worked. All they can do is Google, but the finite details of it in a way that nobody else will have that kind of information. And I think these are such strong parallels and power tools. So even there are times like, I've been in spaces and I'm just seeing what is happening. Maybe I'm working in something. I'm just like, what? This will make such a good TV show.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like you're in academia and just like, this is such these are such amazing characters. So I feel like if you start to even think of your work in finance like that, you enjoy even going because it's like you're doing free character development stuff. And building. It's happening every day. You're having a new short story is coming. Whether it is insider trading in something and how these people collapsed, everything. I mean, you don't need to tell them, but it's fictional at the end of the day. But my point is, you know what I mean? You can write a TV show, you can write a short film, you can write a short story, you can write a novel, you can write so many types of things, right? Writing exists in multiple ways. So for me, it's like, I even love the fact that, I think it's important for people to have other things that they do because it gives them a space into different worlds. Because sometimes you find that a lot of writing that is very much based on just, it can be very clinical. There's nothing else happening. Or these people have to spend so much time people watching and observing to even be able to get anything interesting. Yeah. But you live that every day.
Sometimes you read a story and like, I can taste the Wikipedia in
this. Exactly. I'm like, this is my area. So so I would say that, everything is always interconnected. And if you have the mindsets that, everything is connecting together and meshed together, then you don't feel like one thing is separate from the other, or you're failing at one thing, or you're not giving one thing enough time.
Fair enough. I think it's been really, really lovely. I would want to ask you one more question before we sign out, right? I'd want to say, what's your life like on a day-to-day these days?
Oh.
in 2024 Lagos.
It's 2024 Lagos. Yeah. Right now, this month, I haven't been doing very much other than exercising a lot. So I feel like, I think because I worked a lot towards the end of last year. So I've been, would I say resting this January? But because I haven't had any work. I do have, of course, you always have personal stuff that you want to work on. Yeah. But I've kind of told myself to just rest. So I've just been working, mostly like exercise, just like walking. I wake up 5 a.m. every morning usually to go on a walk. God. Yeah, because once it's 7 o'clock, flies start coming out. So it's you're swatting flies on the streets of Lagos. So I'm like, 5 a.m. I go on a walk from like 5 to like 6:30. Come back. Now I had a personal trainer, so that one comes. But if not, I'll just give them 1 hour nap, 2 hour nap. And then really start stuff at like 9, 10. And that could be a bit of reading some things, scribbling stuff down, ideas. There's a lot of ideation.
Yeah, it seems very chill. It seems like you've defeated the final boss of capitalism. You're just like engaging on your own terms. You know, like when you play GT and you finish all the missions, so you're just doing like casual.
I can't come and kill myself. Stuff. No, but the truth is that there's like because I work for myself, so there are seasons. There are seasons where it's like work is insane. My own masters too will be on my case. So there are seasons where my masters will come into play, and the seasons where they're not there, I'm just like, okay. Let's chill. Let's go and have lunch with a friend. Go and visit somebody. Those kinds of things. Go to your friend's office down the road. Go and play there small. Yeah. But aside from that, I'm usually whatever work is. So I could be working on a consultancy. I could be working on my own personal projects. I could have clients work for a poetry performance, for an event or a brand thing. I could be working on my own collection or my own album, that sort of thing.
Is there anything you want to just like name drop? Or are you working on? Should we be expecting anything?
I was supposed to work on my 4th album this year, but I feel like it might have to be moved to next year.
Why not? This is January.
No, this is January. Let's see how the year goes. Because I have this new thing, and it's not that new, but it's been over the last, I think, 4 years where I've chosen that I only want to put one personal project out at a time.
Fair enough.
I used to do that thing where I did a lot of things, and audience-wise, it's not great because you're giving the audience too many things and they can't keep up. You know, so I remember one year I had my Culture Diaries series out. I would do my Room 313 series. I would do documentary series. Like, it was just too much. And also I think people don't get the chance to really kind of, one thing doesn't get the chance to marinate. For people to really enjoy. Okay, like, oh, you have a book out, let's enjoy this book for the next 1 year or two. You have this installation, okay, oh, where can I see it? So we know the one thing that we have and that we are pushing, you know. Yeah. So my thing now is I'm trying to have only one personal project out a year. I'm supposed to be having like a poetry collection out this year. So let's see how that goes. So hopefully that will be the main project. If there's time, I'll probably record the album. If not, the album will move to next year.
All right, now. Yeah. Either way, we'll be waiting with our bows out.
Hey.
So thank you very much for spending time with me. Thank you very much for chatting, and look forward to running into you at some event in Lagos again.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Boom.
Peace and love.